What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Episode 3 of the Fresh Finance Podcast. My name is Thomas Elms. I got my co-host here, Kyle Ryan. Today, we are talking about retirement planning. So this is kind of the bread and butter of what Kyle and I's job normally looks like, just allowing our expertise and guidance to help people get planned and ready for their retirement. So today, kind of topics that we're going to discuss is we're going to kind of briefly go through the different types of retirement accounts that are available. And then we're just going to kind of talk about some of the key age points that people are going to go throughout their life that are kind of important reflection points to kind of check in, see if you're on pace, and also some key kind of retirement age numbers that are important when it comes to doing withdrawals, taking RMDs, Social Security, things of that nature. And then the bulk of this episode is we're really going to kind of dive into when you should start planning for retirement and how important the retirement planning process actually is. And Kyle, kind of just to get everything going here, kind of if you could walk us through, the big conversation that we're always having is traditional versus Roth on the IRA side and on the 401k side. If you could kind of, opening this up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this kind of, I wouldn't say apples to oranges, but this either or even maybe a little bit of both conversation, and how you tend to, work with clients in situations like that.
Absolutely. And, it's a really hot topic right now, the Roth versus traditional 401k IRA conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So you really want to start by defining what they are. A 401k, a traditional 401k, a traditional IRA is considered pre-tax, meaning that if you make $100,000 and you put 10% or $10,000 into your 401k, that means that you will be taxed as if you made $90,000. You get a deduction. Yep. Now, on the back end, as you go with your 401k, your $10,000 balance, as it grows, you're not going to pay taxes on the growth until the moment with which you take that money out of your account. Mm-hmm. Now, to start, you got a deduction against your income. So therefore, when you take that money out, it's going to count as ordinary income, as if you made it through working again. So it's going to get all those taxes you missed out on, you got to skip out front, you got to pay the piper eventually. Mm-hmm. That's basically the very 30,000 foot view of how a traditional IRA works. Yep. On the flip side, an after tax, or more specifically a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, is used with after tax money. You get paid $100,000, you put $10,000 into a Roth 401k, you get taxed like you made $100,000. So this money, the beautiful and my favorite part about the Roths is that it grows tax-free. Okay. Now, you pay taxes in today's historically low tax brackets that we have, and it grows tax-free for the rest of your life. On the back end, no taxes. It can make a very significant difference. So just from the high levels, that is how the two of them works. And then we're going to get into, some of the intricacies here. But Thomas, is there anything just pure definition-wise about the two of them you'd like to add?
Definition wise, not necessarily, and I think, often we come across situations where someone is going to ask us, hey, I make this much income, is the traditional or the Roth the better option? And the always, assuming answer to that is, well, it kind of depends on your circumstances. The biggest piece here is you always want to kind of weigh which you prefer more on the tax benefits. Do you want to have more tax benefits on the front end, or do you want to have more tax benefits on the back end? I would say traditionally, most people, once they retire, taxes are the last thing they want to deal with in the first place. So in that conversation, most people would say, okay, I don't want to worry about taxes on the back end, so I'm going to go Roth. Now, on the flip side of that, we do have some people who have, incredibly, I wouldn't call it incredibly, but they have a kind of middle ground income right now, but they're planning on being really saving oriented and investing oriented. So they're really looking to try and maximize, bulk up their retirement assets, and their retirement spending might actually be higher than it is now. That's kind of the conversation is, do you plan on spending more money right now or more money in retirement? I think that's kind of, the conversation that you want to have, and kind of deciding that piece of whether you want to go traditional or Roth.
Absolutely. There's a lot of good ways to look at it. Is your tax bracket higher today versus in retirement? And one thing, this has become a very prevalent topic, and I'd say the last, really 6 years, maybe even beyond that, with the Roth IRA, because we've traditionally had very higher tax brackets than we have today, right?
Yeah.
And for the last 80 years or so, people have been hearing nothing but slam your 401k, saving your 401k, saving your IRA, get the tax deduction, because why would you pay taxes in retirement? You don't have a job. How are you going to be in a higher income tax bracket, right? That's the traditional thinking. It almost seems like it's a no-brainer, right? Of course, you don't have a job in retirement. Why would I take the tax deduction in retirement when I'm not making any money?
Yeah.
But a lot of that has changed, and it really changed beginning with Reagan starting to tax your Social Security based on your income.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a long time in the works here, and we just have tax brackets that really support the Roth IRA, because you pay your tax bracket. It's you really, our job as financial advisors, and what we'd like our listeners to start thinking about is, you could take a look at your income today and your tax bracket today, and if you're in a medium tax bracket today, you might think, okay, well, when I retire, I'm going to be in a very low tax bracket. But if you have significant retirement assets, which will result in required minimum distributions, if you have high Social Security, these are a couple of factors that can launch you into a tax bracket that you would not expect to be in retirement.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. You know what? And kind of on top of that, kind of the history of the tax system, I know it was brief, but 2017 was a huge year for retirement plans. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act essentially allowed and created the idea of a Roth 401k. Up until then, that was not even an option. The best you could do in a Roth, on the Roth side of things was contribute your $6,000 a year. If you're under 50 or 7, and the limits were even lower. As we go back in time, but now you've got the ability. 2022, you can do up to $20,500 a year as an employee in a Roth 401k. That's just like, as far as history goes, that's unheard of in Roth-like retirement plan options. And so I feel like there's so much value to that, especially for high income earners, because the kind of the one drawback to a Roth IRA is there's actually income limits that if you start to phase out of, if you have money that, income that's over that, you actually can't even contribute to a Roth in the first place. The Roth 401k, there's no limits, right? Yep. You could be making $20 million a year and you can still, fully fund your Roth IRA. And there's just so much benefit to that.
Yeah. And to take it even further, while we're on the conversation of, legislation that changed the game, if you will, 2019, end of 2019, I believe, they came out with the Secure Act, right? And the Secure Act limited, so basically what happens when you inherit an IRA or a Roth IRA, previous to 2019, you were able to, say you inherit $100,000, right? You could stretch that $100,000 out in distributions over the course of your lifetime. Yep. So if you're 20, 30, 40 years old inheriting this money, you don't have to take a lot of money out. Mm-hmm. Whereas the new rules, they just changed it to no matter your age. There's a couple different differences depending on your relationship to the account owner. But assuming, you're just the child of an account owner, you have to liquidate the account within 10 years. Now, I've come across client situations in which you got a huge IRA, over $500,000 or so, and one beneficiary. Now, paint yourself the picture of you being 25, 30, 40 years old, however old you are, you inherit $500,000, $1 million. Yeah, lucky day. No one's going to complain about that. But if you have to liquidate it in 10 years, and all of a sudden, let's say it's $500,000, no growth. That's $50,000 taxable per year. And let's say you're a high income earner in in a California, in a New York, and a New Jersey, you're going to be paying more than you'd expect on taxes on that. And that's just a further benefit that we've been utilizing of the Roth IRA, is that once you have to, start liquidating these funds, you do not pay taxes on income from a Roth IRA. And that is the most important distinction, I'd say, between the two in terms of retirement planning.
100%. And it's so funny you bring that up, because I know that wasn't necessarily something we were planning on talking about, but it's so important because that is like such an influx of the outreach that I get, with new prospective clients, is they're anywhere from 30 to 55. Some of them are a little bit older, but they give me a call and they say, hey, I just inherited my dad's IRA account and it's got $900,000 in it.
Yep.
What do I do? Right.
Yep.
And they're kind of like, hey, I have 10 years to do this, if they even know that, because there's not a lot of educational material that's kind of talking about this kind of things, which, yep. And kind of even on that note, the next 15 to 20 years is going to be one of the greatest transfers of wealth the world's ever seen. There's supposed to be $68 trillion in wealth that's going to be transferred to heirs. Yep. So that's children, grandchildren, spouses, things like that. That's going to be changing hands. And a lot of people don't necessarily know the intricacies that are super important to understand and recognize when it comes to the planning process, right? And that's why I always really like telling my clients that have kids, whenever you start to get into retirement, it might sound kind of crazy, but start kind of bringing them in. It doesn't have to necessarily be with their advisor, but start bringing them in on conversations to let them know, hey, this is kind of where we're at, me and your mom, I'm kind of operating as a dad here, but, me and your mom, we're kind of letting you know where we're at so that you can kind of start having an idea of, hey, when we pass, this money is going to be coming to you guys. And you need to make sure that you have a plan in place that's strategic and that's correct, to inherit those monies and actually utilize them well, and efficiently. So you're not paying too much in taxes.
Absolutely. And, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. And that's the name of the tax game, right? So that's where, we find a lot of our value at as tax planners, as financial planners, as advisors, that's where we really, can add a lot of value. It's not just retirement planning. It's not just estate planning. It's how they all tie in together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really like that you said tax planner there, because some people think that's kind of a hot ticket item for an advisor to say, but as certified financial planners, we've got knowledge and experience and education in tax planning. That doesn't mean we're a CPA and we're going to be helping you file and prepare your taxes. What our tax planning approach is we're going to say, hey, this is your situation, and we need to kind of project what your future tax situation might look like and how we can, from today, navigate in a way that's most efficient and most helpful towards mitigating any sort of future taxes on the back end. That's really what tax planning is for financial advisors and CFPs. I think that's, one of the most underappreciated pieces of our business. And I'm sure, we'll get to an episode on tax planning here, within the next few episodes, but you're totally right, especially on the retirement conversation.
Yeah, they love making it easy for us, and they really clarify what the expectations are. I say sarcastically.
Exactly. Right.
You really never know. You can reasonably expect tax rates are going to go up because, again, we're in the lowest tax rate system we've been in since World War II, and our deficit's only going in one direction, right? But again, that we could do the Roth versus traditional conversation an episode on its own. But for the sake of time, one thing I'd like to ask you is, could you give me a little bit of insight into some other financial retirement plans and how they can work for folks?
Yeah, and the four that we talked about are kind of the brick and mortar for what we would consider a salaried employee, like a W-2 employee. The plans that we really like for business owners, for entrepreneurs, are going to be either the SEP IRA or a solo 401k, and just kind of breaking these up because they're very similar in nature. There's pros and cons to each one. On the SEP IRA side, I really like that because it's incredibly easy to set up, establish, and maintain. If you're a solo individual who's maybe you've got a small business, you're earning good income, you have the ability to not only make an employee contribution as yourself, you can also make an employer contribution because you're kind of the owner and the employee all at the same time. And so your contribution threshold is way higher. Right. Yes. So, we talk about a normal 401k for a salaried employee, their max is 20,500. If you're a little bit older, it gets up to 26,000. But for, a SEP IRA, the max contribution this year, I believe, is 61,000.
Oh yeah.
Which is way higher, and it's, similar on the solo 401k side. So here's one of the things. If I ever run into somebody that owns a business that's like, hey, I'm running into some tax problems, I've been trying to, have my CPA help me, things like that. Do you have any advice? And I'm like, well, I can't technically give you any sort of tax related advice, but here's the thing. If you have extra cash that you've got towards the end of the year, you can just throw it into a SEP IRA or a solo 401k and bing, bang, boom, there it is.
Absolutely.
You can essentially, cut, if you did the full 61,000, it's kind of income dependent. But if you could do the full 61,000, there's 61,000 off of your taxable income. Because a lot of people are like, hey, I need to go buy a car. I need to, go buy a work truck, or I need to go buy, real assets for my business. There's a lot of truth to that. But for most people, for most, solo individuals, there's only so many like hard assets that you can buy before you're kind of wasting, because the nice thing about the SEP or the solo is that money is injected right into your retirement account that you can grow tax deferred and then utilize for yourself when you're done, with your business. And so there's so many good avenues there.
Absolutely. And the one thing I will add to the SEP IRA piece is that, at least in my findings, it's best for an individual and or a family practice, because let's take a hypothetical here where I'm a business owner and I have 3 employees. And, I want to save for myself. I want to give the employees there a little something, but I really want to, as a business owner, I want to save for myself, right? I want retirement planning. I want to maximize tax efficiency. If I give myself if I maximize my contributions to the SEP IRA, you have to match on a percentage basis what you give your employees. Okay. So if I pay myself 20% of my income, I've got 2 employees that are making $100,000. I got to give them 20% of their income as well. So it's something to consider. And, besides those 2, because they are wonderful. Solo 401k is a great tool for an individual sole proprietorship. A SEP IRA is great for a family-owned business, in my opinion. Then the additional last one I would say would be the simple IRA. And a simple IRA is exactly for what I believe to be the small business practice, 3 or 4 people, in which case it's similar to a 401k, but not exactly. There's different contribution limits. But basically, you have to match 3% of course, there's different variations that really get into the niche of it, but you basically have to match 3% of an employee's contributions if you're the business owner. And then you can get up to $13,500 for yourself, or $16,500. And so, as you can see, there are a lot of different options that you have as either an employee or an employer to begin saving for retirement. And just to reiterate, my first point is, I've gotten this question: is it too early? Is it too late? It's never either. The right time is now when you're thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I this will kind of lead into this conversation is the quicker you start to plan, it's crazy. It sounds crazy because it's kind of back to the investment conversation is people are trying to just go super high on returns. Like they're just trying to redline returns every year as much as they can. The nice thing about starting retirement planning early is you can kind of get that idea of how much money you actually need to end up retiring with. And once you find that out, you can nail down how much you need to contribute and then figure out what that kind of rough annual return you need to get is to get you there. That annual return number, if you start earlier and you can contribute consistently, it's actually a lot lower than most people would think.
Yep.
I mean, it really is.
Yeah. I mean, if the rule of 72 is a mathematical phenomena that I love. If you're making 6% a year, you basically take 72 divided by your percentage rate of return, and that's how quick your money will double. So, it's a great point. If you start this earlier you start, the better, the compounding interest will be. And the less aggressive you have to be. I've got 50-year-olds who 60-year-olds who aren't aggressive investors, but they've waited and waited and waited to save. And now you pigeonhole yourself into becoming an aggressive investor because you need those returns. You need to grow your account. So, you don't want to see that, but of course, we deal with them. We're able to navigate through that. You just have to be really aggressive in saving and in your investing at that point because you're forced to.
And here's the bottom line. And this should be like the punchline of this episode is I've never met a single person that was pissed off or upset that they started saving for retirement early.
I could use that $50 every other week on something better. I've never heard that either. Like the small amount you just chip away at.
Find me a person that is like, gosh, dang it, I started saving too early.
Yeah.
Right. It's just not going to happen. And this is kind of, especially with young guys like us, we're a part of the young generation, the generation that's supposed to feel like they're immortal and are never gonna, need to worry about money in the future, right? Because I can always make more, right? Well, the issue with that is you just continue to push that off, and they're saying now, 30s are the new 20s, right? So you don't start till you're 35. That's 13 years, if you start working, at 22, which is kind of the norm, kind of post college, that's 13 years you could have been growing money.
And, I mentioned this in a previous episode, but it's the psychology of it. If you're able to chip away, 3 to 10% of your 401k, you're contributing to the IRA, the Roth IRA, what have you, it makes you start feeling good when you see that balance go up. It's really hard to start later. And all of a sudden your cash flow that you're used to, you spend all these years getting used to it. Now it's reduced and you're really changing your lifestyle and you're just not accustomed to the difference. And starting early is everything is, just building good habits and building consistency there.
And a thing to that, because and I'm sure you get this question a lot, often as well, is people will always ask me, well, how much should I contribute to my 401k? Well, the answer to that is, what's your retirement plan? Right? Because that's going to be you find out how much you should be contributing to each account when you actually start setting up a retirement plan. Yep. That's the answer right there. Because Absolutely. Some people are like, oh, and I know we've kind of talked about this as, general guidance is like, oh, like I should just contribute the match. What if your match is 1%? Oh, I should just be contributing 6%. Where'd you get that number at?
Yep.
And some people are like, oh, I'm just going to go 15%. And it's like, well, is that too much? Like in a hypothetical situation, because if you're super frugal and, you're just kind of in a mode where your retirement lifestyle is not going to be super expensive, enjoy that money now then, but the ultimate thing is it kind of boils down to, hey, what's your retirement plan? Like, what are you supposed to be contributing each year to get to your goal? And I think that's where a lot of the questions kind of boil down to.
Look at us bringing cash flow planning right back into it. Again, like
confusing everything.
Well, no, it's all how it correlates with one another. You can't just take one area of financial planning, expect they all correlate with one another. And that's, the idea of why we got our CFPs, right? Because we want to be able to understand the intricacies of how they interact, right?
Yeah.
So
it's funny, man.
One thing I believe that you may have been getting into was the question of, all right, well, how much do I need to save? All right, well, then you have to step back and what's the plan? How much do you need in retirement? I've gotten that question a lot. I love that question. 100%. How much do I need to retire? $1 million, 2 million, 10 million?
Yep.
Who knows, right? Well, if you live, like you mentioned, a very frugal lifestyle in retirement, you don't need as much. If you live a very expensive lifestyle in retirement, you're going to need more. So the question I always have people change their thinking, not how much do I need, it's how much do I spend? And therefore mapping that out. If you spend $6,000 per month, as opposed to $7,000 per month, that's over the course of 20, 30 years of retirement. That makes a significant difference in your percentage chance of success, essentially. So really getting an idea and an understanding of one's cost of living, their expenses, is the most important part. And when you're trying to map that out, it's really easy to do today because you know it. But when you're trying to map out expenses in the future, you'd be surprised that, what you may not think of or forget, medical expenses are only increasing. When you stop working, you got more time, you want to go see the kids, the grandkids, that's not cheap either, traveling. So, you want to help.
And it's only going to go up. I mean, inflation's at a 31-year high, right?
Exactly.
It's only going to get more expensive.
Inflation's not going away, right? At least not.
Here's a really easy rule of thumb that I like utilizing with clients, because normally when we first sit down with somebody and we start kind of approaching this conversation, I would say about 95% of them, when I say, how much do you want to retire with? They've got no earthly idea, which is completely understandable because this isn't their profession. This isn't their area of expertise. And they probably just haven't really taken the time to think about it. Right. Yep. And here's my quick little tidbit on this is, if you want to retire and spend the same exact amount of money that you're spending right now, as far as, like, you could either do it expenses or income. Like I know we keep going back to this, but if you make $100,000 a year, right, and that's what you want to live off of each year, what I always say is just take that number and divide it by 4%, right? Because here's what it'll do is it'll get you essentially to 4 million, right? So that tells you I need to retire with 4 million, and it's called the 4% withdrawal rate theory. And essentially what it is just a backdated financial planning theory, that's been modeled out for however long it's been for forever. But it essentially says that if you only spend down 4% of your retirement portfolio each year, you should be able to last with the same exact account balance you retired with. Now, there's inflation conversations that goes, applies to that. There's, investment return conversations that apply to that. Even just fluctuations in annual income needs, that's going to respond to that. But I think it's a really great rule of thumb. And it's a good place to kind of start the conversation, and to even add on to that, some people I'll say, hey, if 4 million seems like a number is just like impossible to you, then I'll say, okay, well, kind of adjust the income number, right? So maybe do 90% of your income, maybe do 80% of your income, and then divide it by 4%. Yep. And essentially what you'll do is if you start to get on track and you actually get to those goals, like where you're on track to meet it, then just raise your goal, right? Yep. And then it kind of slowly allows you to build up. Because my personal opinion as an advisor, I think that 3 million is the new $1 million goal that everybody used to talk about. Yep. And it sounds crazy. Most people think $1 million is a lot of money. And I can tell with 100% confidence that you'll agree with me, $1 million can get spent very quickly with taxes and with just retirement spending, lifestyle, emergencies, things come up. Like you said, medical issues, $1 million can get spent very easily.
Oh, absolutely.
And I just think with where inflation's at, with where taxes could possibly be going in the future, I just think 3 million is the new 1 million.
I totally agree. The only one side piece, I love that 4% rule. I use that quite often. And I very recently read an article that the 4% rule might have to get lowered to the 3.67 because, like you mentioned, inflation, investment returns, bonds ain't doing what they used to be doing. Mm-hmm. So just a little piece. One other piece to that, other than the expectations of bonds here, would be, let's see. I lost my train of thought.
That's fine. That's fine. I was gonna say something.
Yeah, please.
Kind of rolling in here, the ages. So there's kind of very distinct ages that are becoming important in the retirement planning conversation. So if you could kind of walk us through some of those ages, because I think especially for young investors, they aren't necessarily privy to this type of information. I think it's really important to start understanding as quickly as you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Starting from the lowest age, that's, I would say, really relevant to retirement planning and understanding, your own finances would be, the first one's age 59 and a half.
Yeah.
What an easy to remember number. 59 and a half, that applies to distributions from retirement accounts. You have an IRA, you have a Roth IRA, 401k, whatever it is. They say that you can't really take distributions under the age of 59 and a half, or you will be subject to a 10% penalty. Meaning if I want money out of my 401k, my traditional IRA, if I want money out of that and I withdraw it, I will pay taxes and a penalty.
Yeah.
So that is the most, that's the first very significant age. And again, why they pick 59 and a half?
It's the actuarial tables, man. It's
I know, but they just make it so much fun. Regardless. So after 59 and a half, you get Social Security. Social Security, you get to start taking Social Security at the age of 62. There is an age for 60 in which you can, collect a divorced or an ex-spouse's Social Security, but that's not as relevant. 62 is when you can begin collecting your own Social Security at a reduced rate.
Yeah.
On the other end of that, 67 is your full retirement age.
Currently.
Meaning that, what?
I said currently that's the full retirement age.
Exactly. Today, it is, it's 67 is your full retirement age. And then that's when your Social Security is exactly, if you're going to make $2,000 a month, $2,000 a month, no reduction, no addition. Yeah. Age 70 is when it stops growing. Mm-hmm. To back up a little bit, so age 65 is when you are eligible to begin collecting Medicare, Medicaid. So that's a big, we could, discuss this separately, but that is a big retirement date milestone for a lot of clients I've come across is I'll retire at 65. Let me take a guess why, because Medicare? Yes. Yep. So that's, that's a big time. And then I'd say the last really significant one would be at age 72. this is when you have to start taking required minimum distributions. If we ever say the words RMD, that is what we're referring to, required minimum distributions. Now, the government, whether you believe it or not, is pretty smart in terms of taxing.
Oh, yeah.
And the IRS. So, they want their tax money. It makes sense, right? So you contribute to an IRA, you're in your 20s, you contribute to an IRA, you get a deduction. That thing is, if you never touch it, it's growing and growing and growing, tax deferred. And what the government wants is they want a piece of their money, right? So at age 72, they say you have to start taking out a certain percentage of your retirement plan, and it's the traditional side has required minimum distributions. Yep. Roths do not. Okay.
Another reason.
Yep, another big reason, right? So on the traditional side, as you get older, you have to take a certain percentage. It's around 4%. Actually, it's changed very recently, so don't quote me on that. Very recent changes to the required minimum distribution tables. But you have to take a certain amount out at age 72, and then it's significantly higher at age 90 because you are that much closer to, the
transitioning. That's what I call it. Transitioning.
That's a cleaner word than I had any in my head.
Dying, so right?
Yeah, but those are what I'd say is the really significant dates there.
Yeah, and the hot ticket item here, and we kind of talked about this before we started this, is there will be riots in the streets before Social Security goes away. I mean, yes. Everybody and their brother is asking me, am I going to actually get my Social Security? And obviously I'm not the all-seeing eye, but with the population that we have and kind of the always well-represented elderly population that we have, there is no way that the government cannot pay out Social Security benefits.
Political suicide.
Yeah, it would be riots in the streets if we had a government that decided to no longer pay Social Security, regardless of the deficit, because that's almost the number one reason why people ask is they say, hey, the deficit's going to keep climbing. We're not going to get our Social Security. Do I think that the deficit has a little bit to say in the conversation? Yes, but the budget is always going to get reworked to make sure that gets paid out. I just can't see a United States without Social Security.
You want to hear my opinion of what they might do alternatively?
Yes.
And of course, it's purely an opinion, right?
Yeah, this is purely opinion. Fair disclosure.
Fair disclosure. They can means test it, right? Sure. So, they means test being income dependent. You make over a certain amount of money, you don't get Social Security. They're kind of already doing that in the terms of Medicare, right? So Medicare, when you turn age 65, you get to start collecting Medicare. Medicare is typically more inexpensive than a private healthcare policy would be, right? So everyone jumps for joy when they hit Medicare. Well, there are brackets with Medicare in which you have to pay a certain monthly premium. Well, if you make $1 million a year, you're paying in the highest bracket. Whereas if you make $0, you're paying the lowest amount, right? But you're paying. So they do this already with Medicare. If you make X amount of dollars, you have to pay more for it. Well, Social Security could be very similar in that if you make X amount of money, does Bill Gates need Social Security? Well, he's entitled to it, right? So if you make over a certain amount of money, I could very easily see them means testing Social Security. I don't know if that's the end all be all, but they're kind of already putting these processes in place where I think that could be the answer because correct me if I'm wrong. What is it, 2034, 2032 that Social Security is supposed to begin dwindling, if you will?
I think it's 32.
Yeah, 2032.
Hypothetically.
Yeah. And, again, I'm not concerned about it. And I've got clients who are in their 50s saying, am I going to collect Social Security? I'm like, I think I'm going to collect Social Security. Yeah. I'm not worried about it.
I think we're the only 24-year-olds that are almost positive we're going to be collecting Social Security.
Yeah, because again, it's no politician wants to go out on that stand and be like, I am going to be the one to reduce your income in retirement.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. See you next year, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and not to get too political, but I think this is kind of like on the same situation as, and this can be divisive. So heads up here, but like student loan forgiveness. Like,
oh boy. Yeah.
it's like, as a young person, you're like, oh, yay, great. But it's like, there are people for hundreds of years that have been paying off their own student loans. And even your parents are probably, they probably just got done paying off their student loans. And it's just like, it seems unfair to a degree, but yeah, I mean, just summing it up, I mean, Social Security,
Yeah, I could jump into that. It'd be interesting. Yeah, I've had clients who are like, if they cancel Social Security, I'd be livid.
Yeah.
And, I keep myself quiet because I wouldn't be.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of back on the Medicare conversation, the income situation in relation to how much you're paying and monthly premiums on Medicare and Medicaid. One of the things I kind of like a quick little planning idea on the retirement side that I always really like noting that almost nobody knows about is whenever they actually look at your income in relation, yep, there's the fingers. Whenever they look at your income in relation to how much you're going to pay for Medicare, they backdate it 2 years.
Huge.
And so what people think is, oh, I can just work until I'm, 65 and I can just retire at 65 and then I've got no income technically. And my Medicare benefits aren't going to be taxed as much. That's not true. And so kind of what we always try to optimize, if possible, sometimes it's not, is we try and say, hey, once we get to that 2-year mark, let's try and like cut income as much as we possibly can. That's whether it's, take an early retirement and see if you can maybe privately fund, some healthcare, or maybe go on Cobra. But there's, kind of a little planning idea in that, because the thing about it is it's backdated and it's kind of set. Now sometimes it fluctuates, but it's kind of set there. And so you will really want to make sure, because that's your healthcare for the rest of your life. People are living longer. That could be 20, 30, 35 years, if you make it to the hundo.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember I was contemplating whether or not I wanted to, but it really, really is a unique financial planning tool that most people really just don't know about. And one thing I will add to it is that it has to be for I believe it's a life-changing event, meaning that if you're 63 and you begin collecting Medicare at 65, and they're looking back at your 63, and you retired, right? You retired at age 63, so your income significantly went down. Medicare is going to write you a letter at age 65 saying you owe this higher amount for your Medicare, and you got a petition saying, no, I retired, or there was a death in my family that reduced our income. There has to be a life-changing event that will qualify you because, if you do a Roth IRA conversion, right, and you're 63 and you just load up your income, well, at 65, if you try and petition it and they look back, they're like, dude, you converted your Roth IRA. That's not our problem.
Yeah.
So that's another piece of it, is that it has to be some sort of life-changing event there that will qualify you for that reduction. But that is a huge financial planning tool that we use. And, we love using that one. So I'm glad you brought it up.
I love it. Great stuff. I think we're good. You got anything else?
No, this is really where I believe we add the most value to our clients, is that in the retirement planning. I always say my favorite client are those approaching retirement, because there are so many different planning tools you can utilize to really help make their retirement plan more efficient and work better. So, if you're considering retirement or anything, I really recommend you reach out to a financial advisor to really just kind of go through the details. The devil's in the details. And if you don't know them, you could be hurting yourself unintentionally.
Yeah. 100%. I got 4 things. All right.
Let's hear 'em.
Figure out where you're at now.
Yep.
Figure out where you need to be at retirement. 3rd piece, figure out how to get there.
Yep.
4th piece, find a person that is upset that they started investing early. It's going to be the title of this episode.
Yeah. Yep. No one's upset investing early.
All right. Well, hey, great episode, man.
As
everybody
always.
Listening, everybody watching, doing a little bit of both. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We'll see you next Friday.